Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle DeMarzo. I'm the Curator of Education and Academic Engagement at the Fairfield University Art Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our latest iteration of Art in Focus for Spring 2025, where we'll be taking a look at one of the paintings that is in the exhibition that is currently on view through April 10th. It's called Dawn and Dusk, Tonalism in Connecticut, and I'll show you, for those of you who have not had a chance to see the exhibition, I'll show you a few installation shots. We have, I think, 54 paintings by artists who followed a style, a very loose style, let's say, that we refer to as tonalism. And the prefix of the show, Dawn and Dusk, comes from the fact that these artists generally prefer to do their painting either in the hours of early dawn or at dusk for the kind of light effects that it produced on the landscape. So the paintings are almost exclusively landscapes that don't have evidence of sort of human action. And the painting that we are going to be talking about is the one that you see on the wall facing us directly ahead. Get a little bit closer there so you can get a sense of its nice scale. We just had a group of 10 or so folks perched on little stools in front of this in the gallery a few moments ago. And there it is, without its frame, without its sense of surrounding area. We're looking at the caption as well. This guy's got a wonderful name, Robertson Kirtland Mygatt. We're looking at, and it's supposed to say edge of the pond, excuse me. It's not, I gave it the wrong caption. Yeah, I gave it the wrong caption. This is called Edge of the Pond, and it's from circa 1910. We have another painting in the show that is his landscape from 1911. If this is your first time watching an Art in Focus, we try to do in the Zoom version a similar version as to what we do in the gallery, and that is I invite you to share any observations, any questions, anything that comes to mind. And you can put that into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. And that really is what our conversation entailed in the gallery just now, in that it's such a large painting. I'll go back to this view for a second. Relative to the other works in the show, it's one of the larger works. It's sitting alone on a wall. We've kept the wall color from our previous exhibition because we decided that this nice dark charcoal was a nice complement to these landscape paintings, which cover really all four seasons. If you come to see the exhibition, there are paintings that depict winter. We were joking about how you might instinctively shy away from a painting called Frosted Fields at this particular moment in February. Maybe you want to look at the autumnal views, or you want to see a spring meadow, or maybe you want to look at something that certainly suggests maybe something vernal, maybe something summer as edge of the pond. And some of the adjectives that our guests shared with me in the gallery, tranquility was one of the first words that someone used. They said, this is very soothing to me to look at. And I mentioned that when I was setting up Art in Focus for this coming semester, it falls on me. I get the great privilege of choosing, well, what will be the objects that we just dedicate 20 minutes, 30 minutes to sitting around and looking at. And we always try to have a mix. If you've watched these before, you know we will look at something that's in a temporary exhibition. These paintings, for example, are only on view through April 10th, if you're planning to come and take a look. We'll mix it up with things that are in our permanent collection but are not on view to let them have their moment in the sun, so to speak. But when I was choosing an artwork for Art in Focus, I'd actually originally selected another one by an artist last name Murphy called Sleepy Hollow. So if you had registered for a reminder a month ago, it probably said Art in Focus, Sleepy Hollow, 1885. And the reason that that changed is because when we unpacked these paintings, getting them ready for installation, I was just absolutely enthralled by this one. And there is such a difference seeing what you're seeing on screen. This is the high resolution JPEG that I had all along for the past couple of years as this show was in its planning stages. You know, we had images of these artworks to work with, and the images are wonderful. And the image alone, we loved this painting so much, we put it on the cover of the brochure. So if you come to the gallery, you can take that home with you as a souvenir. But it wasn't until I saw it in its full size, how much larger it is than the other paintings around it, that sense of serenity that came through, it came through so strongly once I saw the painting in person. And I thought, well, this is the one that I want to sit in front of and talk about. There's nothing wrong with Sleepy Hollow. It is lovely. It is autumnal. If that is your jam, you're going to want to take a look at the Sleepy Hollow painting in the gallery. But Mygatt's Edge of the Pond, for me, is just really pleasing to the eye. And I wonder if you think so. I will say it was not universally a favorite among our visitors in the gallery today, because when I asked, what does this make you think of? And as I said, people said, oh, it's soothing, it's tranquil. And someone said, humidity. You're like, all right. I mean, it is a pond, it's a wetland situation. And a little later in our conversation, we were talking about how we might imagine the sonic landscape. Like if this were a video, what sounds would you expect to be hearing? And people said, maybe some frogs, maybe some spring peepers. If you live near a pond, I have a pond on my property, and I was very surprised at exactly how noisy those tiny little tree frogs can be in early spring. And the same woman commented that the first sound she thought of was mosquitoes. So she acknowledged she is a winter person. She is not a spring, summer person. If you like the season that this painting seems to suggest, though, maybe humidity and mosquitoes will not be the first thing on your mind. We talked about the way this landscape, because they're almost all landscapes, the way this landscape is set up and how it is both very calming and evocative and yet also slightly mysterious. There are a couple of things we discussed what is mysterious about it. The one that is closest, the thing that's closest to us is the situation of this lone tree. So we have a copse of trees off to the left. We presume that the forest continues there. And then in the right-hand side of the painting, you have this one lone little sapling type tree, not a lot of foliage, not a lot of branches, standing apart from the others. And the person who brought that to our attention first in the gallery was herself, in fact, sitting further away. She wanted to be very concerned about not potentially catching any colds from anyone, so she sat further back. And she said from a distance, it really stood out to her. And I'll go back to give you a little bit more of a sense of what this is probably what she was seeing. She was sitting much further back than we were. And she said that distinction between the group of trees and the lone tree is what stuck out to her. And she immediately said she sort of empathized with that tree, that she often felt herself as being a little bit separate from the crowd. Again, with the subtle irony of the fact that as she brought this up, she was separate from the rest of us. And then we talked about why we might imagine the tree off to the right. Why is it isolated from the others? And it's just a reminder of how much fun it can be to look at an artwork with a group of people who are different, for example, from my colleagues. We've spent a lot of time in the gallery together, the four of us who work here at the Fairfield University Art Museum. And here was a group of fresh eyes, or I would say a number of folks who came have seen the show 3 or 4 times already, but they were eager to sit down and just look at one painting. And they immediately pointed out that, well, it might not be that tree is a sapling, which is how I sort of responded to it. I thought of it as a young tree that has not yet leafed out as much as the ones off to the left. But they said if you think about it being planted sort of almost in the water, they said maybe what's happening is the water level of the pond is growing and it's compromising the roots of this tree. And so the tree is not newborn, but perhaps on the edge of decay and falling over, which is fascinating because, again, not the immediate thought that I had, but it certainly makes a lot of sense. I have a detail, not because I was thinking of the tree, but because we were talking a little about the colors that the artist used, which I must apologize, are not going to come across in their true chromatic warmth on this screen and in your Zoom as they will in the gallery. And for that, I must simply say, if you are in the area and you can come to Fairfield, Connecticut and see the show, it certainly repays being able to get up close and personal. So this is a detail of the sky around that lone tree. And one thing that I think might be difficult to make out, perhaps around the very top of the tree, you might be able to get this sense of very horizontal brushstrokes, this warm cream tone. And that's evident when you look at the painting in the area of the sky. They're just very delicate. They're not uniform, they're not lines, but there is a clear sort of horizontal movement of the brush. And behind it, coming through only in a few patches, we see this cooler color coming up behind. And I read that color as sort of a lavenderish gray. And it was interesting because we pointed to the same patch on the painting in person, and someone else said, I see what you're talking about, but to me, that is pink. I'm like, okay. I mean, color is a challenge to talk about in that way when two people can look at the same thing and different words will come to mind to express it. What we could agree on that there was this interesting juncture of what clearly, based on the paint pattern that you can see in person, it clearly appears that the cool color was applied underneath, maybe not universally over the area of the sky, but certainly in some areas. And then the warmer cream yellow was pulled across it in these horizontal areas, and with some patches letting the underlying color come through. And that happens to reflect a principle of tonalism that an early writer, Burge Harrison, he published a book actually right around the same time as this artist was painting Edge of the Pond. And he talked about vibration as being one of the key components of this kind of landscape painting. And I said that to the group. I said, vibration, what do you think? That was actually what took us into the soundscape, because someone said, oh, I hear the hum. And they immediately took vibration to refer to sounds, as well you might. And then I talked about what this author was really referring to, and he was talking about a mixing of warm and cool tones without blending that would produce this sort of visual vibration, which is something I read that, and I think that's what I see going on sort of in the sky of this particular painting. Jane points out that the lone tree gives me a sense of melancholy. It's old, perhaps dying, and alone. Yeah, it's interesting that you're the second person to say that, yeah, that sense of sadness and separation is what stuck out to them. And I think perhaps it's the color palette, the fact that it's warm, the cream of the sky and the green, and the fact that I happen to have a positive association with those colors didn't let me see that initially. I can see absolutely where that reaction comes from with this picture. We mentioned too in the gallery this question of, I'm just going to go back to the installation shot so you can see a few more of these tonalist paintings together. There's our main wall. You can see, you can definitely spot some winter scenes here, which, as I mentioned, I certainly was not going to highlight. I want to think about warmer climes, although at least in Connecticut today, it is gray and raining. It is not snowing. And I did think to myself, looking outside, I wonder if the tonalists would like this weather. Like, I wonder if they would find it interesting. This also helps you get a sense of scale of some of the artworks in the show. Many of them are quite small. The Edge of the Pond painting is just a little bit larger, I would say, than average. They're all landscapes. Most of them are painted in and around Connecticut or sort of the Hudson River Valley. But the joining connection was not only that the artists in the show had something to do with tonalism, which was painting landscapes with this often sort of diffuse light, this sense of presence, of sort of a spiritual presence in the landscapes that they're looking at. But the curator of the show, Marianne Holohan, was looking for artists who had lived in Connecticut, worked in Connecticut, painted Connecticut. So if you, oops, I've gone too far. If you know of a painter who is classified as a tonalist who is not represented in the show, one reason for that might be that they did not paint in our fair state. And in fact, this artist, Mygatt, forgot his name there for a second, he painted this while he was living in Ridgefield, Connecticut. So it has sort of a direct link to us here in Fairfield County. And a lot of these landscapes certainly have the appearance of having been painted outside. And you can read the wonderful essay written by the curator that is in the brochure for this exhibition. It's available free to download on our website, as well as picking up a copy in the gallery. And she mentions in there that many of these artists, they are Americans. It's the last 2 decades of the 19th century, early decades of the 20th. Many of them traveled to Paris. The earliest tonalist painters became very interested in the artists of the Barbizon school, who did emphasize painting outdoors, but always bringing it back into the studio and letting memory soften nature's edges. And so that is what most of these painters, we believe, were doing, often doing studies outside, maybe beginning paintings outside, taking inspiration from the landscape around them, but often doing the actual work in the studio. So they're not photographs, they're not photorealistic recreations of Connecticut landscapes, but they are certainly evocative of our state, of the Hudson River Valley. I'm saying that because the blue tinged picture at the upper left is a painting of the evening in the Hudson River Valley. Bringing us back to our friend Mygatt here, the other thing that drew me to him in choosing him, like, I want to sit with people and talk about this painting. It's not just that it's large, that I find it calming, that I was enraptured by this warm and cool tones in the sky. It was also to learn that in his lifetime, he was not known for painting large paintings, but rather for making very small paintings. He painted cigarette boxes, collection of which still survives. But just imagining an artist who's used to working small, going to grand, I found that intriguing. And then I was especially intrigued to learn from the curator that when he died in 1919, the artist left explicit instructions that all of his surviving artworks were to be destroyed. And as she wrote in her essay, happily, his instructions were not followed. And everyone, I mentioned this in the gallery, everyone sort of said immediately, like, yes, of course, we're so glad. Otherwise we wouldn't be seeing this painting. And isn't that funny that we tend to put a very strong emphasis on carrying out the wishes of a deceased family member? And yet in this case, when it is an artist, we immediately see the wrongness of following their instructions to destroy their work. Just an observation. We did have a couple of practicing artists in the group, and I asked them, would they have a sense of why someone might choose to do that? And someone said that, well, when I finish making a work for about a year, it's the last thing that I want to see, and I don't want to be associated with it in any way. And I said, all right, well, he had the better part of a decade after he'd finished this work to kind of make up his mind about whether he wanted it destroyed or not. But as he said, he left the instructions were not followed, and we still have Robertson Kirtland Mygatt's paintings, 2 of them in our show, Dawn and Dusk, Tonalism in Connecticut. If you'd like to visit the website for the show, you can go to www.fairfield.edu/museum/tonalism. And you will find a virtual tour of the exhibitions. You can zoom around and see all the paintings at scale. You'll be able to download the catalog. But we certainly really hope that you will be able to join us in person because, as I mentioned, these paintings do really repay sort of a chance to look at them closely. And I will mention that something that makes this exhibition a little unusual for us and generally in terms of exhibitions when I go to museums, even great ones like the Met or the MFA, very often you're looking at special exhibitions that are drawn from other museums and public collections. And what is unusual about our exhibition is that the majority of the paintings come from a handful of private collections in New York and Connecticut, including this one. I know I gave it the wrong caption, but Edge of the Pond is also in a private collection. And what that means, what I was reflecting on looking at them in the gallery, there are some of these paintings that I could look at them, I feel like I could look at them for years. And then to know that when the show closes in April, they will return to a private collector, and who knows if I'll ever see them again. We are often very fortunate to have extraordinary works of art in great public institutions, especially here in the Northeast. We are very fortunate to have wonderful museums along the I-95 corridor. But sometimes there are artworks that, if they belong to a private owner, this is a rare opportunity to see them in one place together on public view. Luckily, one of my other favorite works in the show is a painting by an artist named Henry Ward Ranger, and that is on loan to us from the Florence Griswold Museum in Old Lyme, Connecticut. So at least that one I know after the show closes. There's a chance I can meet that again in the future as an old friend. But Edge of the Pond, I'm just going to have to look my fill before the show closes in April. And with that, I hope everyone had found this a little refreshing thing to look at on a rather dreary day here in Connecticut. And we will look forward to welcoming you to the Fairfield University Art Museum if you are able to join us in person. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining us.